Imagine becoming so rich that you forget the man who carried you when you had nothing. The man whose hands were cracked from years of labor, who skipped meals so you could eat. And then looking him in the eye and telling him to go back to the village because he no longer fits into your life. Not a stranger, not a distant relative, your own father. Listen carefully, because the lesson in this story is one that many people learn too late. Once upon a time, in a quiet village where the red earth clung to bare feet and the nights were lit only by lanterns and stars, there lived a man named Babakola and his only son, Sadiq. Babakola was not a rich man. He was not educated. He did not own cars or houses in the city. But he was known in the village as a good man, a man whose word was stronger than a signature, a man who greeted everyone with humility, even those younger than him, a man who worked the land from sunrise to sunset and still found the strength to smile. Years earlier, Babakola had buried his wife, the woman he loved with his whole heart. She died quietly after a brief illness, leaving him with a small boy and a pain that never truly healed. Many people advised him to remarry. "You are still strong," they told him. "You need a woman in the house," they said. But Babakola shook his head. "This boy is my responsibility." From that day, his life revolved around one thing, his son. Sadiq was a bright child. Even the village elders noticed it early. He asked questions that children his age did not ask. He read faster than others. He dreamed bigger than the land he was born into. But as intelligent as Sadiq was, he carried a heavy burden in his heart: shame. He was ashamed of the cracked walls of their mud house, ashamed of his father's worn-out clothes, ashamed of the smell of sweat and soil that followed Babakola everywhere. While other boys played freely, Sadiq often stared into the distance, imagining tall buildings, clean roads, and a life far away from the village. "This place is too small for me," he would whisper to himself. And Babakola noticed. He noticed how his son avoided village gatherings, how he disliked bringing friends home, how his eyes lit up whenever he heard stories about the city. But Babakola did not scold him. He understood. Instead, he worked harder. When Sadiq reached secondary school age, the school fees doubled. Babakola had no savings, no rich relatives, no help. So he did the unthinkable. He sold the only piece of land his father left him, the land that had fed generations before him. When people asked why, he answered simply, "Land can grow again. My son's future cannot wait." Under the scorching sun, Babakola bent his aging back over the soil. Under heavy rain, he tied sacks over his shoulders and walked long distances to sell farm produce. Many nights he went to bed with nothing but water in his stomach so that his son could eat. Sadiq noticed, but he did not fully understand. One evening, as they sat outside their house watching the moon rise, Sadiq spoke with determination in his voice. "Papa," he said, "one day I will take you out of this village." Babakola smiled gently. "Just be a good man," he replied. "That is all I ask." But Sadiq shook his head. "No," he insisted. "I will build you a big house. I will buy you a car. People will respect you because of me." Babakola looked at his son with eyes full of pride and fear at the same time. He had raised a dreamer, but he did not know what kind of man those dreams would turn his son into. That night, Babakola prayed quietly. "God," he whispered, "let my sacrifice not be in vain." And somewhere in the darkness, fate listened silently. The day Sadiq left the village, the sun had barely risen. Babakola stood at the roadside, holding a small nylon bag with food inside: dried fish, gari, and ground nuts. Not because it was much, but because it was all he had. The bus horn blared impatiently. Sadiq climbed in without looking back at the village that raised him. His eyes were fixed ahead, towards the city, towards Lagos, toward a life he believed was waiting for him with open arms. Babakola raised his hand and waved. "Remember who you are," he called out. Sadiq nodded briefly. The bus pulled away, carrying dreams, hope, and a young man who did not know how cruel the city could be. Lagos did not welcome Sadiq kindly. The city was loud, fast, and unforgiving. Buildings rose like giants. People walked with purpose, as though they had no time for weakness. Sadiq slept on the cold floor of a friend's one-room apartment. Sometimes 5 of them shared that small space. Sometimes the light was cut. Sometimes there was no food. He woke up early every morning, dressing neatly and carrying his certificate in a worn brown envelope. He moved from one office to another, from one gate to the next. "Leave your CV," they told him. "We will call you," they said. But the calls never came. Some employers did not even let him finish speaking. "Where are you from?" they asked. When he mentioned his village, their faces changed. "You village boys are not serious," one man laughed. "Go back and learn work," another said. Some days, Sadiq returned home with his legs aching, his throat dry, and his heart heavy. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the city, and wondering if he had made a mistake. There were days he wanted to give up. There were days he thought of returning to the village in shame. And on those days, his phone would ring. It was always Babakola. "Have you eaten?" his father would ask. "Are you well? Is the city treating you kindly?" Sometimes Sadiq lied. "Yes, Papa, everything is fine," he would say, even when his stomach was empty. Babakola knew. From his small farm back in the village, Babakola sent what he could, 5,000 here, 3,000 there, money earned from selling yams, maize, or firewood. It was never enough, but it always came at the right time. One evening, after another rejection, Sadiq sat by the roadside with tears in his eyes. He dialed his father's number with shaking hands. "Papa," he said, his voice breaking, "I don't think I can do this anymore." There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Babakola spoke gently. "My son," he said, "even if the world rejects you, remember you have a father who believes in you." Those words settled in Sadiq's heart like medicine. So he tried again. He accepted menial jobs. He worked as a loader, as a cleaner, as an assistant to people younger than him. He swallowed insults. He swallowed pride. He swallowed hunger. And each time life tried to break him, Babakola's voice echoed in his mind. "Hold on." Years passed like this. The city tested him. The world mocked him. But somewhere between rejection and resilience, Sadiq learned how to survive. He did not know it yet, but the same struggles that humbled him would one day make his pride unbearable. Then, one ordinary morning, Sadiq's life changed forever. It came in the form of a property deal. A single contract that promised everything he had ever dreamed of. A wealthy investor from abroad needed someone to manage multiple properties across Lagos, someone who understood the city's pulse and could move discreetly. Sadiq had worked hard, learned quickly, and trusted no one blindly. The investor saw that in him. The deal was massive, the kind of deal that could change a man's life overnight. And it did. Within weeks, Sadiq's bank account swelled beyond imagination. His small, cramped apartment became a sprawling penthouse. The floors gleamed, the ceilings were high, the view stretched across the city like a painting, lit by the neon lights that never slept. Cars followed, expensive suits arrived, new friends with polished smiles and quiet confidence appeared in his life. People who once ignored him now shook his hand, listened to his ideas, and asked for his advice. Even his accent changed, slowly, unconsciously. Words elongated, phrases softened, as though the city had rewritten the way he spoke. And along with wealth came arrogance. It started subtly. He no longer mentioned the village. He no longer asked about the farm. Slowly, Sadiq stopped picking up his father's calls. Sometimes he would look at the number and think, does he really need me now? When Babakola called, asking about his health or sending small savings from the farm, Sadiq felt his strange twinge of embarrassment. What would my friends think if they knew where I came from? He stopped replying promptly. He stopped visiting. He stopped mentioning Babakola in conversations. Sometimes, he even avoided thinking about the village. At social gatherings, Sadiq laughed at jokes that mocked rural ways without realizing he was laughing at himself, at the roots he had worked so hard to escape. And yet, there was a quiet tension in his chest, a whisper that he ignored, a whisper that told him he was forgetting someone who had carried him through the worst days of his life. But in the glittering lights of the city, amidst friends who wore wealth like armor, Sadiq silenced that whisper, for now. Because the city had finally given him everything he thought he wanted. And in that new world, there was no room for the old life. No room for the father who had once carried him on his back. No room for the man who had built him from nothing. The stage was set, and what Sadiq did next would change both their lives forever.
It happened on a bright Thursday morning. Babakola arrived in the city unannounced. He came with the same quiet pride that had carried him through years of hardship. His clothes were old, patched in several places. The fabric smelled faintly of the earth he walked, of rain, of sun, of life lived simply. His feet were dusty from the bus ride. His hands bore the marks of decades spent planting, digging, and carrying heavy loads. He came with excitement, his heart swelling with joy. He could finally see the son he had dreamed for so long, the son he had sacrificed everything to raise. And he did what he always did. He called him by the name only he used. "My little Sadiq," he bellowed, loud enough to make heads turn. Sadiq froze. Friends in the background chuckled politely, unsure of what to do. Business partners shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The smell, the sound, the very presence of the father seemed to press against the walls of his carefully curated life. Sadiq's face tightened. His hands shook ever so slightly. Embarrassment poured through his veins like fire. Not now, not in front of them. "Papa," he began, but the words felt foreign in his mouth. He wanted to shrink, to disappear, to erase the years of sweat and dust from the man who had given him life. Babakola, oblivious to the tension, began telling stories about Sadiq's childhood, the neighbors he had scared with a goat, the time he had fallen into the river, the first day he rode a bicycle. Sadiq's jaw clenched. His friends leaned in, whispering just enough for him to hear. "Big men don't move with villagers like this. Your father, he'll scare away investors. You want people to take you seriously, don't you? You can't have him around like this." And suddenly, Sadiq felt a pang he hadn't expected, a mixture of anger, shame, and irritation. He looked at the man who had carried him, fed him, and given him every chance to rise, and he felt nothing but a cold weight of embarrassment. He wanted the world to see him as he was now, polished, successful, untouchable, not a boy who once ran barefoot through dusty fields. Yet, Babakola, proud and unaware, smiled at him, his eyes bright with love and anticipation. And in that moment, Sadiq realized something terrifying. He had no patience for the man who had made him who he was. The city had whispered in his ear, convincing him that love and roots were inconvenient, that humility was weakness, and that the past was something to hide. And so, as Babakola reached out for a hug, calling him "my little Sadiq" again, Sadiq stepped back. Just a fraction. But it was enough. Enough to begin a chain of events that would test loyalty, love, and the very meaning of success. Because shame had arrived, and shame, when mixed with wealth, can be more dangerous than hunger. Sadiq had tried to keep his father close,
but only in the ways that suited him. He rented a small, narrow apartment in a quiet part of the city, bare walls, a single bed, a small fan that wheezed weakly in the heat. He told himself it was temporary, just until I can make him comfortable, just until people stop staring. But deep down, he knew what he wanted. One evening, after a long day of meetings and deals, Sadiq finally confronted his father. "Papa," he said, his voice tight, polished, cold, "we need to talk." Babakola looked up from the worn mat where he had been sitting, quietly unpacking his few belongings. He sensed the tension. He had seen it in Sadiq's eyes for weeks now. Sadiq began, words spilling faster than he intended. "You belong in the village." Babakola's hand froze mid-motion. "You don't understand this life. You don't know how things work here. People are watching me, Papa. People expect me to be someone I'm not. And your presence, it scares them. It embarrasses me." Babakola said nothing. He did not argue. He did not cry out. He only looked at his son, eyes heavy with disappointment. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Sadiq felt justified. He felt powerful. He had built this world, this life, and no one, especially not a village father, was going to ruin it. But Babakola finally spoke, his voice low, steady, piercing. "I didn't raise you to be rich, Sadiq. I raised you to be human." The words struck him like a hammer. Sadiq turned away, his pride louder than his heart. "You'll stay here for tonight. Tomorrow I'll get you a bus back to the village. It's better that way." Babakola nodded quietly. No protests, no anger. Only silent tears that welled in his eyes and ran down his worn cheeks. The next morning, Sadiq walked beside his father to the bus station. His hand rested briefly on the leather strap of Babakola's small bag, a gesture he didn't even realize was human, almost tender. At the bus, Babakola turned and waved, a gentle, patient smile on his face. Sadiq did not wave back. He watched the bus pull away, the dust rising around it like a storm. And in the empty street, in the silence of his own making, Sadiq felt nothing. Nothing but the echo of the man he had sent away. A man who had carried him, fed him, loved him unconditionally, and had left only with dignity intact. The city had welcomed him, but at what cost? And somewhere deep inside, a shadow stirred, a shadow that would not be ignored. The city embraced Sadiq as if it had been waiting for him all along. He thrived, deals multiplied, offices expanded. A sleek black car replaced the old sedan. A sprawling mansion replaced the penthouse, with walls so high and gates so wide that no one could enter without his permission. He married Adana, a woman whose beauty and sophistication rivaled the glittering chandeliers in their home. She laughed at his jokes, praised his success, and never asked about the past. Together, they hosted dinners with business partners who clinked glasses and whispered admiration. Sadiq walked taller, spoke sharper, smiled wider. And yet, with every step forward, he drifted further from the life that had made him. Calls from the village were unanswered, messages from his father were ignored, letters that should have been kept close to his heart were buried under piles of contracts and invitations. He avoided family roots like a shadow he did not wish to see. Village stories became tales of embarrassment. Hard work became a distant memory. Babakola was a memory too, and memories could be silenced. Meanwhile, life in the village moved slowly, as it always did. Babakola's hair grayed further. His back stooped with age. The sun, once kind, now burned his skin with a cruel honesty. The farm yielded less each year, and the small hut creaked under the weight of time. But every morning before the rooster crowed, Babakola prayed. He prayed for Sadiq, his son, his blood, the boy he had carried through storms, the man who had forgotten him. He prayed for his safety, for his health, for his heart. May he never lose himself completely, Babakola whispered to the rising sun. May he remember where he comes from. May he be human as I raised him to be. And though the days stretched long and the loneliness gnawed, Babakola's faith never wavered. While Sadiq's world glittered with wealth, applause, and admiration, one simple truth remained untouched. The father who loved him, who had sacrificed everything, still carried him in his heart, even when Sadiq had cast him aside. The city shone, but shadows were beginning to gather. And shadows, when ignored, have a way of returning.
It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A small error in a property deal, a misfiled document, a promise that could not be kept. Sadiq's empire, built so swiftly, began to show cracks. First, his partners betrayed him. They whispered behind closed doors, moved funds into secret accounts, and turned on him the moment a client hesitated. Deals that once seemed solid vanished like smoke in the wind. Then came government complications. A key contract, one that had catapulted him into wealth, was suddenly cancelled. Regulations he had overlooked, approvals he had assumed were guaranteed, all became obstacles. Weeks of painstaking work evaporated overnight. Even his marriage, once the crown jewel of his success, began to falter. Adana, elegant and composed, grew distant. She whispered about appearances, loyalty, and the man Sadiq had once been versus the man he had become. Arguments, once rare, now filled their mansion. Cold dinners replaced laughter. Friends, those who once smiled and nodded at his every word, disappeared one by one. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Praise turned into mockery. Those who had once called him genius now whispered of failure. Sadiq walked through his mansion, through rooms filled with silence and marble floors that echoed his footsteps, and realized something terrifying. The world that had celebrated him now turned its back on him. The people who had once bowed before him, toasted his success, and admired his confidence now scoffed in corners. Smiles became sneers. Compliments became laughter at his expense. And worst of all, the city no longer felt like home. The sun that once warmed him now burned his skin with the harsh truth. The lights that dazzled now blinded him. The wealth that once promised power now weighed him down with responsibility, mistakes, and loneliness. In quiet moments, he caught himself thinking of the village, of simple mornings, of the man who had carried him through storms. He tried to push the thoughts away, but shadows of his father's patience and sacrifice began creeping back into his mind. And slowly, like the first drops of a coming storm, the city began to feel less like a kingdom and more like a cage. Sadiq had risen so high, and the higher he flew, the farther he was from the one person who could have guided him through the fall. Because when fortune turns its back, you discover who you really are and who you've left behind.
Months later, Sadiq returned, not as the man who had walked the city streets with pride, suits pressed and cars gleaming. No. He returned broken, shoulders heavy with failure, heart weighed down by mistakes, and eyes haunted by the emptiness of wealth without love. The village had not changed. Dusty roads, familiar huts, the old baobab tree at the center, even the market where he had once begged for coins. Everything remained quietly, steadily, as if life had moved on without him. But Sadiq had changed. People recognized him immediately. Boys who had run barefoot beside him, now grown men, stared in astonishment. Women who once greeted him with smiles now whispered, nodding knowingly at the son who had thought he could abandon his roots. Shame clung to him like a second skin. Every step reminded him of the father he had sent away, the sacrifices he had ignored, the love he had betrayed. He approached Babakola's small hut. Smoke rose lazily from the hearth, carrying the familiar scent of home, both comforting and accusing. Inside, his father sat frail, thin, back bent with age, hair streaked with silver. His eyes barely recognized Sadiq at first. "You sent me away when you became rich, and now you return because you are poor," Babakola said quietly, his voice weak but steady. Sadiq froze. The weight of years, of pride, of every selfish act pressed down on him. He saw the sold land, the rented hut, the years of quiet suffering he had ignored. For the first time, he felt true regret. Tears streamed down his face as he fell to his knees, voice trembling. "Papa, I was wrong. I was blind. I sent you away. I ignored everything you did for me. I am so sorry. Please, forgive me." Babakola studied him for a long, silent moment, then spoke with calm wisdom. "Sadiq, I raised you to be human, not rich. Pride made you blind, but you are here now. That is enough." Forgiveness came instantly, a wave of love he had never expected, washing away guilt and leaving only humility. For months, they lived simply, like old times. Sadiq tended the farm, shared meals, laughed at small moments, learning again what life truly meant. Babakola passed away peacefully one quiet morning, leaving Sadiq with love in his heart and lessons etched deep into his soul. Sadiq left the village renewed. He applied for a job in the city, worked humbly, and earned respect through effort, not wealth. Though he never forgot the pain of his mistakes, he carried his father's wisdom with him every step of the way. Moral of the story: never be so rich that you forget where you came from, and never be so proud that you abandon the hands that lifted you. Wealth can build walls, but humility builds lives. A father's love is not bought, it is earned and cherished.